How's it going, everyone? My name is fallinghurts, and if you're new to the channel, I do reviews and occasionally gameplay, but also game breakdowns as well. And if you've clicked on this video specifically, you're here for my 2021 review of A Plague Tale: Innocence. A Plague Tale, what I'm going to call it from now on, we don't need the innocence, that's going to go out the door as you play the game anyway, was developed by Asobo Studios and was published by Focus Home Interactive, and that name should mean something because everyone talks about how this is the defining AA game experience. It's not quite AAA in budget or scope, but it's not indie entirely, and this game has won so many awards for, best narrative or technical achievement with the rats. This game is insane. It's on pretty much every platform, PS4, PS5, and Xbox One Series X and S. They're getting enhanced editions, Nintendo Switch through streaming, and of course PC. This game blew my mind. I went in with insanely high expectations due to what I was hearing about the game. Like I said, it released on May 14th, 2019, and ever since then, I did not jump on the bandwagon, the hype. I knew little to no spoilers about the game other than that you were a sister looking over your brother. Again, but that's all I knew at first, and all I heard from every reviewer I follow personally saying how amazing this game was. And with that high expectation in mind, this game blew me away. And while I am rather new to reviews as a whole on this channel, there are a couple categories that I found myself falling into, one of which being narrative, another being gameplay, visuals, and therefore sound as well. Those are the core categories for my reviews, but one thing that I would like to add, seeing as how I'm calling this a 2021 review, I would like to talk a little bit about how the game is aging, seeing as how this is the first game that I'm reviewing that has actually had a budget to represent what that means. Otherwise I've only reviewed a Kickstarter or an indie mod project. So to jump straight into the narrative department here for a second, to give a brief overall summary without going into spoiler territory, because I don't like to do that in my reviews. Maybe minor things here and there if it's pertinent to the actual review itself, but nothing insanely major. You play as Amicia Darun, and she has, in the beginning, kind of not very good relationship with her younger brother Hugo, who you are going to be looking out for as a gameplay mechanic throughout this game. In the early moments of the game, you are the son and daughter of a lord. You are soon ostracized from that, lordship or whatever. You are no longer high noble society, whatever, and this is in France, by the way. Very early on in the game, the brother and sister find themselves on the run from what is called the Inquisition, and that's a faction that is looking for Hugo specifically for some reason that you don't find out until throughout the course of the game. All the while this is happening though, and the big name title sake of the game as well as much of the marketing for the game, a plague comes about, and it's brought on by the bite and the carrier of a rat. Now this isn't, a boring plague by any means. We're not talking about the bubonic up in here. Now we're talking hordes and literal piles of rats are going to come at you, and the only thing that's ever going to stop them is light. These things act like piranhas. They eat people whole while alive, but light. Light is the one thing that will drive them off at all times, and that brings up a lot of really interesting gameplay experiences, and that plays into the puzzle and gameplay mechanics later on that I'll talk about. To summarize the rest of the game, you'll be meeting a myriad of new characters who are going to add a lot of different depth to both Amicia and Hugo's characters as well. Now that you know the basics, I can talk a little bit about how the pacing and the delivery of the story works and how it maybe doesn't work at certain times. So first off, I would say that the pacing is actually done really well because it is told almost entirely through the perspective of Amicia's eyes and her character, so you're not going to get some far-off cutscene, some weird plot is happening behind the scenes. You don't get that. You see what she sees, and if she doesn't see something, you don't know it either. Now that does come as a detriment, and you notice this a lot more later on down the game, when you're seeing characters you've never seen before, but you realize they're the quote-unquote big bad. Though I have no true issues with the perspective that the game chooses to use, it is very jarring when for the majority of the game, you're seeing everything as Amicia. You do get the occasional one-liner here or there that Amicia doesn't actually hear. So when you're seeing these things or hearing it, it's just so much extra jarring, and it really only happens towards the end of the game. It's very odd. It's an odd choice, and I'm not sure if that was just overlooked or if maybe it just bothers me, but it's really no big deal. The story as a whole is actually superb. It does really well at what it sets out to achieve, and there are even points in time that, due to the writing and some of the delivery from the characters, that the game excels at things that I don't even think it's actually meaning to excel at, And while it's not a big, like, oh, we're making this a very apparent thing, but the game's title or subtitle is Innocence. And a lot of the story is you losing that innocence as Amicia. You're going to kill people, or you're going to indirectly do things that are bad. And this game does a very good job of making you feel bad, but feel right for doing what you have to do to survive and keep those you care about alive as well. So with that being said though, we are going to go ahead and move on to the gameplay, which I think is where this game personally shines really brightly, with a few mishaps here and there. Though I haven't even mentioned it yet, that A Plague Tale is a stealth game at heart. That is, the majority of it is not a super action-heavy combat game, but there is some of that if that's what you want. Like I said, a lot of the gameplay centers around puzzles and finding the light to avoid the plague-ridden rats when you can, or stealthing around Inquisition or other human enemies that are seeking to kill Amicia. This works very seamlessly throughout almost the entire game. I had a few instances where the game wanted me to do one thing and it wasn't always displayed 100% the best, but for the most part, other than a few quick death scenes, it's no big deal. Armed with your slingshot, you'll have quite a few different items or different things. Mostly rocks are going to be your main combat, but there are a few different things that can, say, melt enemies' helmets off so their head is actually vulnerable to a rock, and interesting things like that. One issue I did find in the gameplay though is, say I would craft something of one type, but I would still want a rock out. Occasionally it would switch to the other thing. The game doesn't make up for that quick enough sometimes, so that's one instance where you might result in a death scene over a silly mistake that is just kind of a frustrating thing. But overall, you learn to very quickly use your environment and everything around you to get around. Everything feels like a puzzle. Even the enemies, it doesn't feel like, oh, I just have to kill these guys. No, the enemy itself is a puzzle because you don't always have what you need to defeat them. There are enemies in heavier armor that you can't take out personally, but maybe, you can take out the lights around him and that will leave him exposed to the rats or something similar to that. But with that being said, though, there are always going to be things that Amicia herself cannot do, and she's going to need a companion for. Now, I briefly mentioned earlier the characters, but I didn't go into further detail of sometimes when having a character follow you around, usually it's Hugo, but you'll also have an accompanying person as well. And you can use these people in quite a few different ways. Say a lever bridge needs to be held so you can cross and get to the other side and hold the lever on that side. You can tell them to stay or command them to do things, but really the only interesting thing I have to take away from this is like lock picking or breaking down doors really heavy. There are certain characters that can do these things that Amicia can't. Now, in a normal game where you were the main sole protagonist, this would work that Amicia would just have to learn to do these things on her own and it would just be a button press. But the way they've made it interesting is that I'll just say that the thief girl is the one who is going to be unlocking things when we command it, and to me it adds an extra level of depth to a gameplay element that would normally be one button press, and it also makes it to where we're codependent on these characters just as much as they are in us, and that makes it all more impactful when we have to do things to keep all of us safe. The final bit of gameplay that I have yet to touch is the upgrade system. It works a lot like a survival horror in this aspect. You collect ingredients that you can use to both create items like throwables and things like that, projectiles for your slingshot, as well as upgrades. You can upgrade your slingshot, how much you can carry. So in the end, it's a very satisfying yet focused system. It's very robust. And as you move through the game, you're going to find yourself deciding, do I want to make the premium weapon that's going to help me through this area a lot easier with less stealth? Or do I want to save it for maybe an upgrade later on? Because there are some resources that, you're going to find a very limited supply of. But to summarize, between the satisfying gameplay upgrades as well as the actual stealth gameplay itself going very well with the companions, I would say the gameplay is one of this game's highest qualities. Next up, I'd like to briefly talk about the sound, which overall in this game is very good. I know that's a broad term, but I'll get into what I mean a little more. First, I'll hit on the soundtrack. The soundtrack is incredible. One instance I can give very early on in the game, you've got, imagine this, first chapter. It's beautiful music, you're running through the woods with your dog, and then you hear your dog barking. The dog barking stops. You don't know what's going on, but as you inch closer to find your dog, you hear whimpering, and you didn't even realize it, but before this happened, the music just shifted. It is completely thriller, horror, whatever you want to say, but you're on the edge of your seat before you even realize you need to be. And it's just an incredible change, and that's right in the beginning of the game, and it's good. Overall, the music is really high quality. I would say it's high enough quality for like a TV show. Think maybe Game of Thrones or something like that, and less of like something, an indie game. Well, I don't have too much to say otherwise about the general sound effects of the game. I mean, it's passable. There's nothing to say like, wow, this sounds really intense at any given moment. But, you know, you've got your normal sound effects. But then, of course, you have the voice acting. Overall, for the voice acting, I would say it's pretty fair. There are some dips in quality, as well as certain characters just overall don't sound too good, in my opinion. That is just the nature of the budget for this type of game. A lot of it goes into the gameplay and the story. Less, but not completely bad on the voice acting. Of course, the sound design does paint a very nice picture, but a literal picture itself can be shown in the visuals, and I've saved this for last because this is, to me, one of the defining traits of this game that kind of made it underappreciated for me. All of the environments are extremely well crafted, especially when you consider how little time you might spend in some of them, but everything has an insane amount of attention to detail. There are plenty of different environments as well. You're going to see city, you're going to see, you know, rough in the muck kind of swamp environments. You'll see plenty of different underground rat infested areas, while also being on the inside of a castle as well. All of which happening throughout the different seasons. So you're going to see many different varieties as well as that's concerned as well with the weather. And all of these different factors come together with the idea of budget in mind. They didn't have to do some of these things, but they did. And all of those things come together with the photo mode. You can take pictures, you know, of course, eliminate the HUD and all of that stuff and take some stylized pictures. The photo mode is a little limited, like you can't pose your character or anything like that, but you don't always need to do that. I personally take the landscape screenshots for myself, and I'll post a lot of those here right now. I don't really know where else to throw this in, but I'm not really a tech reviewer, but I play on an RTX 3070, which is way above the settings, but I never dipped below 144 FPS, so everything looks really good, and there's nothing super intensive in the graphics either to warrant a dip is what I was mostly looking for, not so much the frame rate number itself. One issue that I did notice with the reflections in particular is that it looks really artificial, and I'm not 100% sure why, and it just is very off-putting seeing how good the rest of the game looks and feels, that something like that just looks so unnatural. Another issue that I did have from time to time is that from a medium range, not super far away, not super close, the hair resolution looks off, so I'm not sure what sharpening that is or which setting, that it just looks wrong. So I'm not sure if maybe turning off like some of the sharpening settings on PC would help with that. I'm not entirely sure, but it doesn't look that good. While that does feel a little nitpicky, I do have something to say about the game's attention to detail, which I talked about a little bit earlier, but one instance of this was I was walking by a guard who had been dead for a while on the ground. There were maggots falling out of his body, and I just thought this was so cool. It's something you could walk right past and see nothing more of it. But right there in that moment, if you stop to actually look at the guard, you can see this and just appreciate it. I mean, it's disgusting, but I mean, you can. Alright, for the 2021 review part of this, I did want to kind of summarize everything up a little bit, and then I'll get into my final verdict on the game. So of course, as I said, the reflections and some of the sharpening for the resolution in the game don't age too well, but that was something that probably didn't look too good upon release either. However, the technical achievement of the rats as well as the lighting for the rest of the game is phenomenal, and I think it holds up even to this day. So that makes me really excited for what they can do with the lighting effects of the sequel, with potential global illumination and things like that for ray tracing. But other than that, I think the game can only go up from here with I can only imagine, higher budget for the sequel, not that this was a small budget. And with that being said, let's get into my final verdict. Coming in at just under 9 hours for my first playthrough. I got the game on sale, but it is a $40 game, and I've got to say, I think it's worth it. There's not very many times that I can say that anything under 15 hours is worth $40, but this game blows my mind. The pacing of the story, as well as the delivery of it for the most part, is really well done. The visuals and the sound both complement the story and the tones near perfectly. I think the conservational survival horror style gameplay along with stealth works really well, and I think the characters and their addition to gameplay really sells the story that's trying to be told. Though, as I am going back through the earlier chapters for more footage for this review, I am noting that this game isn't really that replayable. I mean, you can find and go for a completionist run of all the extra items that you can find that you might have missed, but that's going to get you a few extra achievements if you're an achievement hunter. but that's really about it. There's not much else to do. There's no side content. So if you don't feel like a really good, solid 9 to 12 hour experience is your kind of thing, then, I mean, I get it. Maybe wait for a sale in that instance. But otherwise, I can say that this game is 100% worth your money for the quality that is being given. And that will do it for this review. My name is fallinghurts, and I'm going to try to expand upon my reviews even further going into this year, and maybe look out for some news content as well, because that's another thing that I really enjoy doing, especially for the games I'm excited about. So yeah, if you're interested in any of that, go ahead and subscribe. Thanks for watching. Bye.